Hello and welcome, everyone. Welcome to the latest episode of the Creative Confidence Podcast. I'm Kalita Stafford, Executive Design Director at IDEO. And on our podcast, we talk to experts about creativity, leadership, innovation, and growth. If you're new to our podcast, we open up the last few minutes to your questions. So start thinking about them and add them to the chat. And I love everyone's already doing what I love to see. Share in the chat where you're joining us from. We've got folks from all over the world. From Brazil and India and Morocco and Milan. Welcome, everybody. And welcome, Angel. Hi, Angel.
Hey, Kev.
I am so excited to have Angel Annunciacao on our podcast today. Angel is from IDEO, and she's going to talk to us about value propositions, what they are, how to write them, what makes for an effective one, all those things, and how to test them, especially. One of my favorite parts we're going to get to is how to test things like willingness to pay. So stay tuned for that. Angel, before we hand it over to you, I need a moment to just gush about you and introduce you to everyone. So Angel is a systems and strategy director at IDEO, and she specializes in launching new products and ventures and de-risking through innovation and experimentation and human-centered research. She has partnered with a variety of global organizations from startups to Fortune 500 all around the world. I understand you focus particularly in industries like food, technology, and hospitality, companies like Google, Marriott, and Kraft. So for any of you who are also working in those industries, I think you're going to love what Angel has to share today. You have a background in an MBA in UC Berkeley. And what I love about you, Angel, what I understand is you have that unique blend of you can set both a vision and a strategy and design the tangible paths to get there. I think that combo is what's really important. And today will be no exception. I hope everyone today is going to leave with some tangible ways that you can do more meaningful work in value props. So let's get into this. Angel, where are you joining us from and what's giving you joy these days?
Thanks, Co. First of all, I feel like I should have you do all my introductions because it just feels so loved. So I am calling in today from our IDEO office in San Francisco, and it's a bit gloomy, which is not surprising. And yeah, just want to say super impressed with the folks it's like midnight for you or 3 a.m. So thank you for being here. What's giving me joy? I would say recently it's actually been swimming. So I used to swim pre-pandemic, and then during COVID kind of stopped, going out really. And then recently there's a place near my neighborhood or in my neighborhood that I found, and I stopped by, and it's just one of those like few moments in life where I feel like I just stop thinking when I'm in the water, and it just feels so relaxing and lovely. And so that's given me a lot of joy recently.
I love that. I understand a couple other things that we can find you doing on the weekends might be baking some new recipes, reading a good mystery novel.
Yes.
So when you're not doing those relaxing, lovely things, one of the things you're really good at is business design, strategy, and ventures. And at the heart of a lot of these things is this idea of a value proposition. So before we go deep, let's just set the stage. What is a value prop? How do you define it? Can you give us a quick overview, including why is it important?
Yeah, absolutely. So think of a value prop as just a simple statement that helps describe what benefit a potential customer might get from using a specific product or service over another. And it sounds really simple, especially the way I'm explaining it right now, but it's incredibly invaluable and important. And both externally and internally. So externally, it serves as a foundation for really any public comms and marketing that you might do, because it's telling your customer, again, clearly what your offer is and why they should choose your offering over a competitor. And internally, it's also quite important because it really serves as a North Star, right? So it helps the entire organization, no matter who the person is, whether they're in accounting or engineering or product, really align on what is it that we're trying to offer in the marketplace. And so make sure that we're all kind of headed in the same direction.
Love that. So just to recap, it's really to help clearly communicate what you offer and why it's valuable, especially customers. And we're going to go deep on this today because this is really the heart of what makes an effective value prop. So do you have a process or tip for writing one, especially if somebody is maybe new to this field?
Yeah. So at IDEO, we start with a pretty simple fill in the blank sentence. And I think you can see it here in the screen. And it is for target user. So insert who your target user is that you're going after, who, and then again, it's the user need. So what is it, that pain point, the need that you're trying to solve for, the name of your concept. So whether it's an offering, a service, a product, and then solves, provides, helps, blank, right? And this is the most important part. It's the benefit that your customer is getting by choosing your product. So let's use an example just to make this a little bit more tangible. So imagine, if I was working with Shopify, for example, back when they were starting out, not saying that this is their actual value proposition, but something that I might write is for the novice entrepreneur. So again, someone who's maybe starting out for the first time, who doesn't know a lot about launching an e-commerce business. Again, the pain point of really starting an e-commerce business or shifting into e-commerce. Shopify provides a step-by-step process to set up, grow, and manage their entire online transactions. Once we have, and so when we are thinking about value proposition at IDEO, we like to come up with a few of these, right? So it's not just about like nailing that first perfect one, but coming up with a couple of different hypotheses. And then once we have a few that we feel good about, we dig into a couple more questions to really flush out the benefit a bit further. So a couple of questions, there's a few of these, but I'll just mention a few for now, or a couple for now, are things like, how does the offer help create value for the customer, right? How is the offer unique to what's already in the marketplace? Because again, there's probably going to be a lot of players out there, right, trying to help business owners with online businesses. So what is it that makes us different? And then what about our offer will really help us differentiate and make it harder for others to imitate? And then thinking about internally, do we have the capabilities to actually bring this offer to life? And if we don't, what are those capabilities that we might want to invest in to really deliver on the promise that we're putting out in the world? And as we explore these questions, we iterate on the value proposition statements and then often land on a few that we then want to take into research to get feedback.
Okay. So I appreciate those details, because you showed one example and it sounded so complete. But what you're saying is it never starts that way. And in fact, you actually want to start with a few variations and be asking some of these different types of questions, like our capabilities, what differentiates. So we're actually going to go even into more detail of this, because what I know you really want people to understand how they can start to add this to their own process. So you gave an example of a template, like how you might write one. Can you tell us a little bit what makes, like, for a more effective one versus a weaker type of value prop?
Yeah. So let's go back to the one that we just talked about, the Shopify example, right? This one's a pretty solid start. Again, not saying that it's perfect, but it's a solid place to start because it's easy to understand. It doesn't get into too much of the nitty-gritty details of like every single feature, but it's giving us enough information for us to be able to understand what makes Shopify unique. So, right. So this idea of a step-by-step, easy process, it helps you grow, manage, or set up, grow, and manage your online transactions. Now, if we want to think about it, like what would be not as effective, right? So again, sticking with the Shopify example, something along the lines of, let's say, give it a second, there we go. For business owners who need help processing online transactions, Shopify helps owners manage their checkout process. This is not as strong as the other one, and there's a couple of reasons why, right? So the first reason is your target consumer that we have listed here is really broad. And yes, we always, we want to make sure that our target market is large enough that it makes business sense to go after them. But we also want to make sure that it's specific enough that we can really distill the unique needs that this target group has so that we're building an offering that's really helping them solve those needs, right? So if you'll remember in the other example we shared, it was really about novice entrepreneurs. It's about people who are doing this for the first time, maybe. And then the second thing here is really about the benefit.
Yeah.
So helping manage the checkout process, could be beneficial. Sure, that might be a need that these entrepreneurs have, but it doesn't really touch at all on what makes Shopify unique, right? So what is it about Shopify? Like, how are they making, or how are they helping the owners manage their checkout process? What's making them unique to what else is out in the marketplace is not very clear here.
Got it. Thank you. That's so helpful. So let's continue on, and let's say your team has a few variations of these value props. What I hear is most important is you really need to connect with your customers, because what I keep hearing you say is you have to understand how it benefits them. So let's talk a little bit about, so how do you take what you may have as a team and what you think the value prop should be, and then actually learn and test with customers? And when we say test, we often mean more like gather feedback in order to improve it versus just land it as a yes, no. So yeah, how do you get started testing value propositions?
That's a great question. And, we do this a lot with our clients. And what I find often about the challenge that we run into is when we're testing value propositions, often our, not just clients, even our team members, right? They feel this pressure to nail the perfect value proposition statement, like the perfect words, the perfect, it sounds really good before we bring the value proposition in front of customers. And I've seen individuals and organizations really rush to like perfect this, and then really get into validation, to your point where you were just saying, Co, versus exploration. And I think the part that I want to really highlight here is value proposition at the end of the day is testing the consumer need, right? What is it that we're trying to solve for? And so that's something you want to do early and often. And so, and especially early on, and we talked about this a little bit before, it's really about testing a lot, maybe not a lot, but a few hypotheses to make sure that we're in the right direction and we're building something that people actually want and need, and something that they'll actually find beneficial. And the thing that's really great, and I know we're going to get into in a little bit, is that you can do this pretty scrappily. So you can do this early, you can do it often, and it doesn't mean you have to spend a ton of time or a ton of money.
Love that. So we even have someone commenting on, I feel frustrated when someone asks, what's your ROI? And I think that's another kind of misstep that organizations can make, is they focus on our ROI, return on investment. We want this new product to up our numbers. But what you're saying is, it's actually need to focus on the benefit it provides your customers. So how do we do that? Do you have a tip for how do we get really good at that?
Absolutely. There are a few ways that I really like testing value propositions, but one of my favorite methods is a card sort activity, which essentially is an activity where you have research participants choose from two different options at a time to get to a short list of what are the benefits that are most important to them.
And I'm laughing at, there's some great commentary on, like what you said, scrappily. And that's exactly right. That is the mindset. So keep going with that. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me use an example again just to make this more tangible. So a few years ago, we had a client that came to us that had developed a new technology that helped people understand how different food groups would impact their bodies. It was pretty novel at the time. It was, they could get really personalized with some really interesting benefits. And they kind of had an idea of who they thought this would be really good for, who their target consumer might be, as well as a value proposition that might resonate. But they weren't 100% sure. So they came to IDEO and said, help us refine or really figure out who the target market should be, refine our value proposition, and then let's build kind of the product and offering around that. So where we started is we sat down with the clients and we kind of just talked through, what are the benefits that this product and service together can offer. So we had there were a ton of benefits that they came up with. And then we chose the ones that felt the most differentiated in the marketplace, as well as the ones that felt really interesting. And we turned them into these really, really simple sentences. So they were even shorter than the Mad Libs that I shared with you before. They were really like, this product, or a product that helps me see X, or a product that shows me, Y about my body when I use it. And so again, really, really simple sentences. We printed them out in these like 2x3 cards. So like really small, one sentence per card. And then we went to research. And then what research looks like is in front, we would put basically two of these cards. I think we had 12 about like value prop sentences at the moment. And we would put two at a time in front of the consumer and ask them, which of these two is more valuable for you, right? Which of these two would you rather have if you had to pick? And then we would take the ones that they chose and keep them. And then we discard the ones they didn't choose. So first we went from 12 to 6. And then we did it again to go from 6 to 3. And along the way, right, we're also asking them questions around like, oh, why this one? What's interesting? Why not that one? And then when we got to the bottom of the last 3, rather than having them like pick, okay, this is the one that I love the most, we had a conversation about those 3. So we asked them questions about, why these 3, what's standing out to you? Why are you getting drawn to them? Things around, would you change these in any way to make them even more valuable for you? Because again, we're early on in the process. So what we want our consumers to do is really edit them, mix them around, and make sure that we're capturing what it is that they find value from and what it is that they're really, really excited about. And I love this activity because if you think about it in real life, right, every purchase out in the world requires a decision, a trade-off.
Yeah.
And this activity in its simplest form is asking potential customers to consider these trade-offs and choose the product that would bring them the most value in their life. And in this particular example that I'm talking through, it was really interesting because at the end of this round of research, what we found is the value proposition that the clients had come in with, people found it interesting. They were like, yeah, that's kind of helpful, but it was by far not the top, like in the top 3 of where people were like, oh, these other 3, if I could have today, if I could get those insights, like it would be quite groundbreaking.
Love that. I love how tangible that is and doable. Kelly asked a great question. So why the nuance of the prompt to have them choose one card over the other? And I asked that intentionally because that was a choice you made specifically. So why that versus just rank order these, which is I think what a lot of people experience?
Yeah, when you have folks ranking, so we had 12, for example, it starts to muddy the answers, right? Because then all of a sudden, like being as a research participant, having to think through all 12 and then kind of say like, okay, I think I kind of like this over this. It takes a lot more processing time. And so usually what you see people doing is like, they'll really read the first like 4 closely, and then you'll see them kind of start to just go quickly because you get tired. It's like decision fatigue. And again, if you think about when you're shopping in the real world, yes, there's a lot of choices, but often people aren't looking at the entire set when they're making a decision. They're looking at a few, right?
Yeah.
So by really kind of being concise in what you're showing them. And the thing is, you are showing them all of them. So you do get feedback on every single one of the value props that you've put out there, but making it 2 at a time, it just helps people compare and contrast a lot easier.
That makes sense. So for organizations who, I love this. So this activity is really around a value prop card sort where you're working with 10 to 12 of your best hypotheses. And it sounds like you edited based on what really got to some of the unique differentiators.
Yeah.
So what if a team needs more quantitative evidence or methods? Can this be done in that way too?
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, if you need to get to a larger sample size, or if you have, a shorter amount of time, because qualitative research does take a bit more time, you can definitely run this as a quantitative study. And the way to do that is to run a MaxDiff study. So what a MaxDiff study does is it essentially asks respondents to evaluate the potential benefits or options within a given set and choose the one that is most important to them and least important to them. Now, the alternative of this, right, is let's say you had 6 value props that you're trying to test. You could put it out into the world and tell people, or ask the question of, on a scale of 1 to 5, how likely are you to buy this product? Or how valuable do you find it? Or even like, are you interested in this offer? Yes or no? And the issue with that is what I find most often happens is that people will rank all 6 of the offers as like really valuable or not valuable, or the worst of which is like they come in the middle, right? It's like every single thing's a 3 out of 5. And that makes it really difficult to understand, okay, well, which one's really rising to the top? Like which one should we pursue? And so the thing that's really great about MaxDiff is similar to the card sort activity. It's forcing respondents to make trade-offs and indicate a preference between the different options. So on the back end, when you get the data, you're able to see how important the different value propositions are relative to each other, not just in isolation. And I'll just also state that, if you do not have experience running MaxDiffs in these quantitative studies, it's not something to worry about at all. Most survey platforms like Qualtrics or AYTM will have this already built into their platform. So all you have to do is indicate that you want to run a MaxDiff. They'll help set it up, et cetera. And then you can analyze the data on the back end.
I love that. And what's so great too is it goes back to the internal team. So all these processes not only help you with your customers, but it helps build confidence for your internal team because you're all looking at the same aggregate data and inputs.
Absolutely.
And just to clarify one thing too, I think you would always do this. You would probably start with qualitative, start with those interviews, hone in, and then maybe follow up with a quantitative to get that scale.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing with qualitative is that it just helps you understand the why, right? You can dig in a lot more. You can also, what I found often is we'll go in with hypothesis, and in qualitative, you'll hear something that you'll be like, oh, that's like, we didn't even think about that. So let's pursue that line of thought a bit more before we kind of decide that it's these 3, where it's just much more difficult to do in quantitative.
Okay. All right. So far, we kind of discovered, talked about what is a value prop, what are the good qualities of it, and a starting activity for how you can start to hone in. So you have another set of techniques, and this is some of my favorites. We're going to talk about willingness to pay. So another way you can hone in on if you're getting to the right value prop is to understand if your customers are willing to pay for it.
Yeah.
I think this is incredibly hard to do. And that's why I wanted you to come on and teach us about this, because I understand you've done a lot of work in this area. So how do you think about this? And then let's get into some of your techniques.
Yeah. I love testing willingness to pay. And it is because of what you just said, which is it's really hard, right? We often find that there is a really large say-do gap when it comes to willingness to pay, where people, what they say they'll pay for something is often very, very different than what they're actually willing to pay. So it's always like a fun puzzle to try and crack. And then the other part of why I love testing willingness to pay is because of what you just said, which is that it is a way to test value proposition, right? Because we're literally exploring with our consumers how much they value an offering reflected by what they're willing to pay for it.
Okay. So I understand you have a few ways of doing this. We have time. We're going to go over 3 today. So let's start with one of the ones that I've heard. So you talk a lot about interviewing people and being live and in research. So there's a moment you can do willingness to pay in this. Can you tell us about that approach?
Yes. Another favorite method of mine, because it's just always fun to see how people potentially shift or don't shift in what they say. So this is, as you mentioned, towards the end of the interview. So, usually in a qualitative interview at IDEO, we've gone through and we've explained what the product or the offering is. We've asked a bunch of questions. And then at the end of our time together, we will compensate our respondents for their time and their insights that they've shared with us. And so in this moment, when we're kind of, we've given them the money or the compensation, I love asking the question, and you can word it in different ways, but usually I'll say something along the lines of, we actually have the product or the offering ready today for you to sign up for or buy. And I'm curious, how much of the money that I just gave you, would you be willing to give it back to me in order to get access to this offering today? And it is so interesting how, the folks who have been for the last 60 minutes where we've been talking about the product or offering, where people are like, oh, I love it, it's amazing. When it comes to actually parting with real dollars, right? So we've given them real money. When it comes to that, you start seeing the hesitations and you start seeing them be like, oh, let me really think about this. Is it actually worth what I was imagining when I was imaginary money is worth? And then it can also be really, really affirming. So in that example that I was giving to you with this novel technology, it was I think it was one of the few times where almost every single person that we asked that question to, they were like, absolutely, I would give you all of this money and I would give you more money of my own, to get this product, because it was so interesting. They found it so valuable. And so in that moment, we knew we were onto something pretty amazing.
Goodness, I love that. It's so tangible and so human.
Yeah.
Okay. So a second approach. So some teams or some situations too, you might not be able to give people real money. What are some other ways that you can test your willingness to pay to better understand value prop if you don't have real money?
Absolutely. That's especially when you're doing a quantitative study, right? It's kind of impossible to give people money and ask that question. And so one thing that I love for when we're talking about something really, really new, so something that's really groundbreaking, right? Something that maybe people don't have a quick idea of the competition costs maybe X, Y, Z. And so that's kind of what I would pay for that. What we like to use here, or what I like to use in those moments, is really using reference points to anchor people. So the questions that we'll usually ask, there are about 4. And again, you can do this qualitatively, you can do it quantitatively and one-on-one settings, group settings, but we will start by explaining what the offer is. And then we'll ask 4 questions back to back. And it essentially goes, is the value of this product for you or offer for you more or less than a cup of coffee, more or less than a pair of new jeans, more or less than a new iPhone, and more or less than a car? So as you can imagine, so it's, this method is not going to give you the exact willingness to pay, right? Because we're talking on pretty wide ranges, but it really helps you define the bounds within which you or your offering can play. And depending on how confident you feel about what that range could be, you can make it really wide. So what we just shared of going from a cup of coffee all the way to a new car, that's a pretty wide range. Or if you're like, hey, we actually know that, it should fall in like the lower end of the prices, you can make it much more narrow. So you can say something along the lines like the range can go from a cup of coffee at 7-Eleven to a cup of coffee at Four Seasons Hotel Bar. So you can kind of play with that and really kind of help you define like, okay, what feels realistic is to play in this space.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. I have one clarifying question, Angel, from our listeners. We've been talking mostly about products.
Mm-hmm.
Do these same techniques apply to services?
Yeah, you can absolutely do this with services as well. And it's just, you want to be thoughtful about what you're choosing as the cup of coffee, right? So for example, if it's subscriptions, you could say like more or less than a Spotify subscription, right? Again, and you need to be thoughtful about where you're doing the research and what are the products and offerings or services that people are most familiar with. But it's really about just creating some reference points so that people can kind of quickly say, even if I don't know exactly what a Spotify, like I don't actually know what Spotify is today in terms of exact, but I know it's probably in like the teens, right? It's probably like between $10 to $20. And so it can help me kind of say, okay, yeah, this should be around 20 or it should be more.
Great. Thank you for clarifying that. So I want to hear one more technique, and we're going to go to questions in just a moment. And we've got some great ones coming in. So thank you, everyone. If you have questions for Angel, please add them. So we're talking about willingness to pay as a way to understand value prop. So I want to have one more technique. And we actually had someone ask, what about things that are not new to the market? What if it already exists, or it's like a competitive entry to things that already exist? So do you have some tips for that scenario?
Absolutely. I love that question. And for testing willingness to pay in general, I like to emulate as much of reality as possible. Because again, you want to know what people are going to do in real life, right? So when it's something that's actually on the market, you can do this pretty easily through observation. And so let me use an example again here. We had a large e-commerce giant come to us, I think it was about last year, and they wanted to understand the willingness to pay or how much Gen Z specifically valued like a sustainable options, right? Because, and what they were telling us was, they've seen all these reports about how Gen Z really cares about sustainability and they want the greener options, et cetera. But then on their platform, what they were seeing was that the products that were more sustainable, more green, weren't necessarily the ones that were selling as well as some of the other options. So we brought together, I think it was about a dozen or maybe 16-ish Gen Z folks who use the platform regularly, who we knew were looking to buy some things in the next 2 weeks. And we gave them, I think, each like $30 and said, you have $30 to spend on the product that you're looking to spend. Walk us through, your thought process. And we had them screen share with us because this was done online. And we just watched as they kind of looked at the different products, as they compared the different products. And, we didn't prompt them in terms of like sustainability or green. And it was really interesting to see that they were, again, on their own, they were actually clicking on the products that had like the little symbol, the little leaf, right, that showed it's the greener option. They were digging into like, well, what does that mean, right? Like, what does it mean when it has this symbol? Or they would tell us things like, oh, I like this product because it's being shipped from me from a more local area. That means that there'll be less greenhouse emissions. So where we were taking away from that was like, oh, they really do care and they are doing the research, and they were also really good at spotting like when something felt like there was greenwashing, like they would call it out and be like, that doesn't feel real, or like, I know that that's much more difficult to do. So that was really, really great. And the other thing that was really interesting is, so we had them, like, again, as I said, look for the options, walk us through, talk us through their comparison, and actually go through the checkout process. And so watching that part, what was interesting is when they were checking out, it also was very clear that sustainability was not the only metric that mattered, right? So when they were checking out, price did play a really important role. And again, what was interesting was to hear the comments around, I really want to buy this product that's more sustainable, but like, I can't afford it right now, which makes sense if you think about where these folks are in their lives, right? This is a lot of like high school students, college students, maybe first career. And so we heard a lot of, I can't afford this right now, but like when I have a real job, I'm definitely going to buy something like this because it aligns better with my values. And so our takeaway from this was, it wasn't around like, will Gen Z or won't Gen Z buy the more sustainable option? It was about the fact that, yes, Gen Z is looking at the more sustainable options. They are digging into the claims that you're making, and they currently can't afford to pay for it, but there is a desire to do so. And so what it meant for our clients is that they really need to be thinking today about how might they help lower the costs for the more green options to really keep the Gen Z folks on their platform, as well as in the long-term strategy, ensuring that they have the right products that are more green, that are more sustainable, because these folks who will be getting more money will be able to afford the more expensive options. These are things that they care about, and they are looking for things that align with their values.
Love that story. It's so tangible. Thank you so much, Angel. So much of what you talk about too is you really give a lot of thoughtfulness to each choice you make in the research process. And one reflection, I think it can sound scary as a team to do this work, to hear from customers that they don't do what they say they might do. But in the end, it comes back to, it's all about de-risking and getting more confidence in what you're doing, that it is delivering value to your customers. And so yeah. So let's summarize where we are, and then let's take some questions. Yeah.
Great.
So before we jump in, some of what we talked about today is value props are important because they help align internal and external teams. And it's all about clarifying what your offer is and how it benefits your customer. When in doubt, like, just focus on the benefits for your customer. Writing a really good one and getting to a good one is not just a one-time thing. It's an iterative process. It's best if it's done with a lot of people and with a lot of customers, I would say. Is that fair?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. And there's a few ways you can test to do that. So one we talked about is like a card sort, where you really focus on the benefits, or a variety of willingness to pay, because that really gets at the heart of if your value prop is delivering to your customers. And so we talked about things like in an interview moment, or as reference anchors, or even like watching the actual consideration process and thinking through that.
Yeah.
Anything you would add? Is there anything you would like the audience to really hold, Angel, on this topic before we transition to Q&A?
It's not so much an addition, but just a reiteration, right? So to make sure that you have a winning value proposition, you, again, need to really make sure it's a unique benefit, that it's meeting a need, an unmet need that your consumer or your potential customer has. And you can't really know that for sure unless you actually talk to these people, right? So we can all have hypotheses. I think we're all experts in our spaces, and yet like you might be surprised by what you learn. So it's really like, I would just encourage people to not wait till you think you have the most perfect value prop statement or the finished product to test this, but really test it early and often and as scrappily as possible.
Scrappily. We're just going to keep saying, we're going to say that as many times as we can today, scrappily.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's dive into some questions. The first one we have is about collaboration and ownership in the value prop process as an internal team. So we've got a couple flavors. I'm going to go with Haifa. Pardon me for my pronunciation, but what is the leadership approach to test the value proposition? Meaning, should it be done by one department or a matrix hierarchy where more employees joining the process?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm going to answer it in terms of collaboration, like when you might want to bring people along versus when it might be helpful to have a focused group, right? So the thing that at IDEO, again, because we're an agency, we often have to think through like, who are the stakeholders? When are they coming in? How do we make sure that they're aligned and they're kind of following with us in the process? And so the times where I think it's really helpful to bring a lot of perspectives in is in the beginning, when you're thinking about, okay, we have this new offer. What are the potential benefits that we could imagine? So it's a little bit of an ideation. It's a little bit of like, let's make sure we're thinking about it from different perspectives of, so I think having someone from finance, from marketing, from sales, that's a helpful time to have a lot of people come in and again, just start. And it's early enough where people can feel like they have some skin in the game, right? They can see like, oh, I helped think of that value prop, et cetera. Refining moments, I think it's always easier when you have a smaller group. So like when you come up with all the different benefits, when you're thinking about, okay, which are the ones that we should actually take into research, and how do we make sure that they're, all pithy and they live at the same level? That's not a big group conversation. That makes it really hard. And then the other part that I would say where it's really, really important to bring in your key stakeholders is during research itself, especially when you're doing qualitative interviews, is we actually invite our clients and obviously all of our team members as well to listen in qualitative interviews, because what we found, and I see you nodding along, right, is it's one thing to tell someone like, this is what we heard, even if you say it verbatim, and it's another for them to actually hear it from that person directly. And we just notice that people will stick, like they will remember it for much longer. They will believe it. There's much more confidence in that statement, in that theme that comes up. And so as much as you can, and again, you don't want to have like 20 people in every single conversation, but having 1 or 2 people in each conversation so they can start hearing and start also thinking through what are the themes that they heard. So when you're distilling it on the back end of these are our top ideas, you've got, again, folks from different parts of the organization. It really helps to build alignment and make sure you're moving in the right direction together.
I love that. And just to build on that, we did have someone ask, like, what are some of the ways that you can bring these stories back or kind of tell to bring others along? And what you said there is so important is I think a lot of teams over-index on just the data, or here's the kind of cold text-based, which is important, but you need the human element. So even if people can't be involved with the interviews, I always try to encourage teams to present their findings with that twofold process. Here's an interview clip. Here's where you hear it in someone's words. You see them, you feel it. There's some great tools these days that just like transcribe everything. You can just grab your clip and then you do pair it. And I know you would agree with this, Angel, as much as possible with quantitative data when you can.
Yes, absolutely.
And so, and you've covered a lot of that today, like why both these techniques are meant to be paired together. So let's, we have a couple more. This is related to like, this is a follow-on. You'll like this one. How much research background do we have to understand the data? This comes from Richard.
That's a great question. And I think it depends on what type of research we're talking about, right? So if you're talking about getting a max diff analysis, like we talked about earlier, you want to make sure that someone who is running that, or at least looking at that data, that there's someone on your team that understands like, okay, how do we read that data? What does it mean? What's the level of confidence that we might need to have? Or, what's going to make us feel really confident that, yes, this is giving us enough information versus like we might need to, ask a question in a slightly different way or run a different type of study. When it comes to more of the qualitative. Again, I think it's helpful to have someone who has done qualitative research before to like think about how do we ask the questions in a way that's not leading? How do we make sure there's not bias in the way that we're asking questions or who we're talking to, et cetera. But in the like, who's listening, who's helping kind of bring up like, hey, there are some themes that we're starting to hear across these interviews or these research. I don't think you need to have like a research background, right? Like as human beings, I think we're all good at like listening and kind of synthesizing and sharing back like, oh, this is some interesting themes I'm hearing, or there's some consistencies here or some inconsistencies there. And so I think welcoming people who don't have a research background in those moments of distilling, like what are the things that are rising to the top, that should actually just help us in making sure we're hearing like different perspectives versus having it be limited just to folks with an expertise in research.
Thank you for that, Angel. Love it. So let's move on to another one. We've got a lot in this cluster around who to talk to. Like, so I'll do one from Martin. How do you recruit participants for qualitative studies? Or from Eddie, how do you find the right customers to talk to? Maybe Angel, do you have a couple high level principles or ways that you think about this?
Absolutely. And it depends on where you are in the process and what type of method you're going after, right? So as we were talking about earlier, when we're doing qualitative research, that's usually earlier in the process. It's when we're trying to like really dig into what is a customer pain point, why are they making the decisions that they're making, or why is something what they say different than what they do? And in these moments, it's not about validation, right? So we're not looking for statistical significance. So it's not about getting 1,000 people. It's really about talking to a smaller group of people. And the way that we think about it is, what are those interesting stories that we can learn from to really help us understand where our design should go, what directions we should explore? And in these moments, we're looking for people that we often call kind of stories on the edges, right? So what are the people that have these unique contexts in their lives that make the need that maybe everyone feels just feel more heightened for them? Or, they have some unique circumstances that make it, again, they have some needs that are a bit unique to them. And the reason we think of it this way is because we believe at IDEO that if you design for the edges, you will capture the people in the middle, versus if you design for the middle, you're going to absolutely lose the people on the edges. So it's really about when we're recruiting, we ask lots of qualitative questions, even in our recruiting around, help us understand how you deal with this, or, what are the challenges that you're facing? What keeps you up at night? To really understand their context and dig into the ones that we think, one, are very varied. So we get lots of different types of stories, and then again, bring out some of those unique contexts. And then I'll just add really quickly, as you get closer to actual launch, right? When you've iterated on the product or the offering and you're getting close to launching, this is when we want to get more into validation. And so that's when we'll dig in more into quantitative, right? So we want to make sure there's statistical significance. We want to make sure our sample size is large enough. But even then, I think you want to be really thoughtful about who you're recruiting and who is responding, and making sure that we have like a large representation within the target market that you're going after.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. So I think we have time for one more, and then we're gonna have to wrap it up. This has been so magnificent. We're not gonna be able to get to all the great questions we have, but we have quite a few around this theme. The last theme is multiple value props and different segments or multiple audiences. So this one comes from Jody. Should we be looking at different value props for different customer and consumer segments?
That's a really interesting question. And I think there is, so when you're first starting out, right, when you are, let's say it's the first time you're going to market with this value proposition or the marketing and comms, you want to have I would say you want to lean towards starting with one, because you want to have a very clear story about what this product is, who it's for. The more that you introduce into the same marketplace, especially, the more you're likely to muddy what that offer is, right? So imagine as a customer, if I'm reading about your product, maybe it's for the first time, and you're telling me it's really beneficial for X over here, but then you're telling me it's really beneficial for Y, then it's like it makes people question, like, is this actually real? Or like, what is it? Why should I pursue this versus another? And so in the beginning, I think you want to focus on like, okay, it's kind of like the MVP, right? What do we want to start with? What's that need that is most
minimum
pressing?
viable product? Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Kel. What's that need that's really going to capture our early adopters? And then you can think about, like, as we've kind of gone our early adopters, okay, is there some tweaking that we need to do the value proposition? Or let's say if you're going into a new market, we want to do the research to say, is it still the right value? Like is the need still the same, that we should stick with the same value proposition, or might we need to tweak that slightly to better meet the needs of a new market?
That. Oh, Angel, I think everybody would like to continue going for a couple hours. There are so many questions. I'm so sorry we can't get to all of them, but yes, this recording will be available. We're going to do our best to follow up and capture all these in a blog write-up very soon as well. So Angel, I'm going to give you the last question.
Yeah.
While you think on it, I'll wrap us up. The last question, quite simply, is what advice would you have given to your younger self at an earlier stage in your career? So while you think on that, I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. We've been hearing from Angel Annunciacao on value propositions. If you like what you've heard, I invite you to check out other episodes in our podcast called the Creative Confidence Series. And if you want to look deeper into value propositions and business design more broadly, which is Angel's area of expertise, I invite you to join us in our IDEO course called Designing a Business, where we have a whole lesson on value props and how to capture and deliver value in market. You can learn more about that at our website, idou.com/business design. And with that, Angel, why don't you take us home with some advice for a younger Angel?
Yeah, I love this. I love this question. There's a couple of things that came up, but I think the one that stands out to me is to not be afraid to speak up. Like, I remember when I was early on in my career, I was often the youngest person or the least experienced person in the room. And I remember like vividly thinking like, well, everyone around this table has worked here longer or has been in the workforce for longer. So obviously they know more than me. And obviously their insights are more or will be more impactful. And it was interesting that it was actually by accidentally saying something in a couple of these meetings where I found out that, like what I had to share was actually interesting, or it was, it made, even if I wasn't as experienced, it made people think something slightly different, or maybe look at a problem in a slightly different way. And a lot of times I think I felt like, I had to have the right answer in order to speak up. And what I found is a lot of times it was actually about just asking good questions that made people say, oh, interesting. We haven't thought about it this way. Like, what would it look like if we were to pursue this path, right? So I would say for folks who are starting their new careers early on, or back to myself, it would have been to trust that you have enough information, enough knowledge, trust that you can add value. Again, it doesn't have to be the perfect answer. It could just be about asking the questions that are rumbling in your mind. And you never know how much of an impact that can have.
Love that insight. Thank you, Angel. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, everyone, for listening in today. And with that, enjoy the rest of your day. And we hope you go out and try some value prop exercises. Yep. Okay.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.